We had no photograph taken out. We had no ID card. We had no ink on fingers.
Good morning, all. This is the 17th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. The committee today is convening its first public hearing pursuant to its inquiry into certain aspects of the national insurance system of Trinidad and Tobago. The hearing is being broadcast live on the Parliament channel, which is channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Members of the viewing and listening audience may send comments via email at parl101@ttparliament.org, on our Facebook page at facebook.com/ttparliament, or on Twitter at ttparliament. I want to welcome the officials and representatives of the Ministry of Finance, the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, and Bacon, Woodrow, and the Souza. Normally we ask all persons attending to introduce themselves at this point, but because we decided to deal with this matter in a certain way, I will ask those persons sitting at the table at the front to introduce yourselves, not only to us, but to members of the viewing and listening public.
Good morning. My name is Suresh Dan, Acting Senior Business Analyst, Ministry of Finance Investments Division.
Good morning. I am Chintamani Suku, Acting Director, Agro-Based Manufacturing and Services Sector, Ministry of Finance Investments Division.
Good morning. I am Jennifer Lutchman, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning. I'm Shiva Ramrup, Ministry of Finance Investment Division, Business Support Analyst.
Thank you all for your introductions. My name is Sophia Choate, and I am the chairman of this Joint Select Committee, which is one of the committees that must be chaired by an independent senator. This committee is made up of 8 members, and we have 3 others here today. So starting from my right, I will ask the members to introduce themselves to you.
Good morning, Clarence Rambarat, member.
Good morning, Prakash Ramada, Member of Parliament for St. Augustine, member.
Good morning, Lovell Francis, member.
To my left is Mr. Julian Ogilvie, who is the clerk to this committee, and you will also see Ms. Sharon Samuel and Ms. Simone Yallery. They also assist this committee in its work. Just so that the listening public may have an idea as to where we are, I'm simply going to quickly read the 5 objectives of the inquiry so that those persons who may want to send in questions or comments will understand that we are operating within a certain parameter. So the 5 objectives that we've set out is to examine the recommendations of the 9th Actuarial Review of the NIB. 2, to examine the implementation of the actuarial recommendations of the 9th Actuarial Review of the NIB. To examine the investment policy of the National Insurance Board. To understand the trends in income and the relationship to the payment of benefits. And finally, to make recommendations to improve the sustainability of the national insurance system. Now, I'm sorry, but I think we will have to start making the lettering on these signs a bit easier to read. Yes, okay. Ms. Lachman, may I invite you to make an opening statement on behalf of the Ministry of Finance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ministry of Finance, as we know, is the line ministry for the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago. We continue to seek to assist the NIB in fulfilling its mandate as we have done in the past, and we are here to assist in any way to forward this inquiry. Thank you.
Well, members, would you all like to start with some questions?
Thank you very much. Deputy Permanent Secretary, can you outline for us the approach the Ministry of Finance would use to interact and to provide oversight for the National Insurance Board?
The ministry reviews the board minutes of the NIB. The NIB is required to provide board minutes to the ministry. Also, the annual reports are submitted to the ministry. And these annual reports go to Parliament through the Ministry of Finance.
So, for example, the 9th Actuarial Review, what has been the ministry's approach in dealing with the 9th Actuarial Review?
The Ministry of Finance has reviewed the actuarial review and has considered the recommendations of the review. Certain aspects of the recommendations were implemented.
Ms. Lachman, good morning. Would you tell us from your point of view the state of health of national insurance in this country?
I can only answer that so far as what is stated in the review. And the review has stated that there are certain constraints, there are certain issues that have to be addressed.
Having said that, are you satisfied then as to whether steps have been taken to remedy some of the concerns? And what are those steps? And what are your concerns?
So far as the Ministry of Finance is concerned, as I said, we have looked at the report, and there were specific recommendations. As far as the health of as I said before, we can only speak of what the actual review has said.
Forgive me, we are before the public of Trinidad and Tobago. There are many things that we will not be able to go through all the lines to. And therefore, I would like, if you could help us, or any member of your team, please, to indicate what state of health we truly are at, what are the concerns, and what are the fixes necessary, and what steps have been taken to achieve those. I think it's really about the benefit of the public, and not just for us sitting here.
Okay. One of the recommendations is that the retirement age be increased. The Ministry of Finance recognizes that this is not a decision that the Ministry of Finance has to take, but as you know, the board of the NIB comprises government representatives, representatives from labor, and representatives from the business sector. So therefore, it is not for, let's say, the Ministry of Finance to make any such decision, but there has to be, I would imagine, consultation across the board before anything is undertaken to increase the age of retirement.
May I just ask if we could get into some specifics, because I find that we're speaking without a context, in a sense. You said that out of the report, the Ministry of Finance is able to tell us that certain recommendations were implemented. I'm sure that members of the listening and viewing public would like to know which of these recommendations were implemented.
Okay, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry to do this.
Sure.
But I think what the chair has, she hit the nail on the head. We need a context. And when I spoke about the health, you will know, we will know because of the documentation that we have seen. But I think the average citizen would like to know. There are rumors about as to where we are in national insurance. Could you tell us where we are in real terms? Are we happy with it? Are we in a crisis state? Where are we? And what are your concerns? And then we'll take it in terms of the recommendations.
Okay. To the chair. The NIB has stated that, as we are saying, the fund is in trouble, and there are some recommendations that need to be undertaken in order for the fund to continue. One of the recommendations that was made and that has been implemented was an increase in the contribution rate from 12% to 13.2%, and an increase in the maximum insurable earnings from $12,000 to $13,600. The NIB has proposed a further increase, but that has not materialized as yet.
Now, could I just interrupt you to ask, is it that you see the problems surrounding the NIS system as being solved only by the increase of payments or contributions?
Madam Chair, the recommendation was also for the increase in the age of retirement, and that is a consideration. Other considerations may be their investment portfolio, but the Act specifically states what they can invest in and what the limits that they have with regard to external investments, internal investments, and that sort of thing. So if they were to use their investment portfolio to increase the fund, it may not increase significantly because they are constrained by the provisions of the Act.
But do you and your team, I mean, anybody from the team could perhaps answer, perhaps Ms. Suku might be in a position to help us with this one. Do you think that legislation expanding the ability to invest would be of assistance, or is it just that the investment portfolio could be better handled as is?
Okay. And Madam Chair, in my personal view, I think that the NIB, it's the way it's established, and it has very stringent and rigorous investment proposal. You have the act that provide for an investment committee. You have different layers and levels of authority that you have. The management will approve up to a certain amount. You have the investment committee that have a different level, and then you have a board. Now, they also went on to say that they have a portfolio which stipulates 80% local investments and 20% foreign investments. Now, generally, if you look at how investments are performing outside there and what we have locally, the local investments is very limited. So if they want to get an opportunity to increase their revenue, it may be better to increase the limit that they can invest on the external market. But to do that, it requires that you need to amend the act. So it will have to be the Ministry of Finance or the Minister of Finance to champion this initiative to take to Parliament.
You represent the Ministry of Finance. So has there been any sort of recommendation, not necessarily through your team, but in the past, has there been any attempt to suggest to the Minister of Finance that perhaps a cabinet note ought to be taken to cabinet so that the expansion of investment abroad can be increased? And if so, what has been the position with respect to that?
Well, I am not aware of any such initiative, but it is something that we should consider, you know.
Chair, with your leave, of course. These committees are about fixing problems. They're not here to ambush anyone or to we gotcha kind of thing. It is really about finding out some of the structural issues and some of the inhibitions that may have been placed before you in the past, because we really do need to fix many problems, and today we're dealing with national insurance. So that, as Chairman has asked, the Chair Lady has asked, there has been yet no, from what you've said, recommendation to the Minister. All right? Is there a prohibition on that? Is there a fear factor? Why is it that something as important as this has not taken the next step to make positive change?
I don't have an answer for that one.
All right. Well, may I suggest one? That we are a very small country with big problems, but we have also solutions that reside in the minds and spirit that you hold. And therefore, Chair, without overstepping my bound, that sometimes, you know, we do need to shake off a lot of the old shackles and do things in a way that is time sensitive, because you can't have reports that have incredibly important recommendations that are not acted upon. And I'm sure my learned friends who in government will share the view that these committees really are about finding off some of those stumbling blocks and fixing them, because sometimes it's just a matter of communication. So having said that, if I may also inquire, having looked at the report—
Mr. Ramada,
yes.
I don't want to interrupt you, but yeah. Dr. Francis has been wanting to ask a question for some time now, so if you would just allow him.
Thank you, Chair. And it really cycles back to where we began, which is the framework that governs the relationship between the Ministry of Finance and the NIB. Now, when Member Rambarat asked about that relationship, I'm sure that you were summarizing when you said that you review board minutes and you get the annual reports. I'm sure the relationship is much deeper than that. But no, it gave the impression of a laissez-faire or hands-off relationship, which would be worrying for many reasons. The NIB has a massive investment portfolio. Is it the case that the ministry has any kind of oversight, any kind of input, can give any kind of advice, even beyond the strictures of the law, to ensure that this thing is managed properly? I am not intending to cast any kind of aspersion directly or indirectly, but we all are aware that we have a state sector where management of critical state resources is not always performed effectively or with the best interest of the nation at heart. What sense can you give us that there is oversight of this investment portfolio? Because your responses seem distanced, laissez-faire.
Madam Chair, through you, Dr. Francis, NIBTT's compliance obligations is in accordance with the Act as stipulated. Though the Ministry of Finance usually collect quarterly reports and monthly reports from other, state entities, NIB isn't required to send those reports to the Ministry of Finance. So when we talk more of an oversight, the Ministry of Finance doesn't have much of an oversight into the financial operations of NIBTT. In terms of the investment committee, the NIBTT may from time to time ask for an increase of the delegated authority of the investment committee, which could be approved or disapproved by the Minister of Finance. So,
well, that makes me quite concerned, because who is overseeing NIB generally? Is it not the Ministry of Finance?
Chair, if I may, well, in accordance with the Act, it's the responsibility with the Minister of Finance. But in terms of, if you're looking for a thorough monitoring agency, the Investment Division or Ministry of Finance, by extension, wouldn't be able to provide that type of oversight as they would over a state enterprise, because statutory bodies are governed by their acts. If we want to enhance that monitoring mechanism, we need to amend the Act to include such monitoring mechanisms.
So sometimes obvious questions need to be asked. So essentially, the NIB is autonomous in its decision-making within the strictures of its Act.
Yeah, within that.
Within that parameter,
yeah,
it is autonomous.
Yeah.
Just out of interest, is there any other state company or state entity that you know of which has this kind of relationship with its line ministry? Or is this peculiar to NIB?
Madam Chair, this is only specific to the statutory boards. The state entities, they are required through our state enterprises performance manual to submit quarterly and monthly reports to us. So that is where our effective monitoring really lies.
And do you have any, what are the sanctions if they don't?
There are no sanctions because that manual is not legislation. It was approved by Parliament, but it's not legislation.
So in a board minute or report, something comes to your attention that causes an alarm, a red flag arises. What is the procedure from the Ministry of Finance perspective? Or is there a procedure? And if so, what is the procedure?
Through your chair, what happens when the analysts review the board minutes and they see anything of significance or any material issue, they would immediately inform the Minister of Finance. And the Minister of Finance will then provide instructions as to the way forward.
What kinds of issues have arisen in the past which would have required intercession with the Minister of Finance?
Madam Chair, there was one instance where there was a purchase of a property by the NIB, and the purchase was questionable, and the Minister of Finance would have requested the Central Audit Committee of the Ministry of Finance to undertake an investigation into the purchase of the property. And the report was done and submitted to the Minister of Finance.
And was any action taken as a result?
There was no action in terms of the Ministry of Finance or the Minister of Finance sanctioning the NIB. I would imagine the NIB would have looked at their internal procedures and taken appropriate action.
Does the Ministry of Finance provide any guidance to the NIB with respect to procurement?
I would have to say no. As my colleague was saying, the state agencies, what they would do, when they procure, they are required to submit returns to the Ministry of Finance stating their procurement, whether they are above $5 million or below $5 million. And we would have a sense of what was procured. If there are any concerns, the Ministry of Finance would then do further investigation and would write to a state agency to provide further documentation. But with regard to NIB, I cannot say that we have done any further investigation into any of their procurement processes, separate and apart from this review.
Thank you, Chair. Very disturbing, I heard you say basically the NIB was asked to reinvestigate its own actions.
Sorry?
The NIB was asked to investigate its own actions.
Through you, Madam Chair. I said the NIB would have undertaken to address the outcome of this. I didn't say investigate its own action.
All right.
Sorry.
Let me put it in other language. It was referred to the NIB to inquire into the purchase of the property.
No, that was a miscommunication. What I said was that the Central Audit Committee of the Ministry of Finance would have done an investigation. And the question was asked whether Ministry of Finance would have done anything, I suppose, in relation to sanctions. The Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Finance was made aware of the outcome of the investigation. But what I said is that the NIB, I would imagine the NIB would have taken action based on the outcome of the investigation.
Dr. Francis, you had a question?
It is not our intention to put you on the spot, Madam PS. But himself investigating himself is a cause of concern. But the larger problem, or the larger concern, I can't say it's a problem, the larger concern is that it seems to be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the effective operation of the NIB comes down to ensuring that you select the right board members. And that if you don't select the right board members, you are basically rolling the dice with the national insurance scheme. Because what we are trying to get the sense of is what structures, what systems, what checks and balances there are to ensure that the thing functions properly. But it seems from what we're hearing that it really comes down to choosing the right people and allowing them to manage the thing within the Act, within that framework provided by the Act. But that seems, from my perspective, a little bit arbitrary. So correct me if I'm reading things.
To the chair, we have difficulty in getting information from statutory boards, some statutory boards. As my colleague stated, for state enterprises, whatever information we request or whatever requirements are as per the performance monitoring manual required by the state enterprises, by and large they comply. But for statutory boards, they are governed by their act, and sometimes we find it difficult to get information from those statutory boards.
Okay. Actually, you have been quite helpful by, in a sense, exposing to us very candidly what are some of the shortcomings of the existing systems, particularly with respect to the relationship between the NIB and the Ministry of Finance. So that has been very useful and helpful to us. You had referred to a policy document that you said you'd been guided by. You recall that?
Madam Chair, is the State Enterprises Performance Monitoring Manual. And the state enterprises are guided by that manual. Statutory boards also use the manual for guidance.
Okay. Is it possible for you to give us a copy of that at some point or send it to us?
Certainly, Chair.
All right.
Madam Chair.
Now, normally what we do is we allow each guest or each group to give a closing statement. But because we are trying to allocate half an hour to each group or each presenter, what I will ask you to do is to save your closing statement until at the end when we've heard from anyone. All right? So I want to thank you for your assistance and to invite the members of the National Insurance Board to come forward, please. I believe you all can stay there. You can stay there.
My staff will guide them as to.
Okay, good morning to the NIB team. would you be good enough to introduce yourselves? I'm sorry that some of you have to sit at the second row, but it's a large contingent today because we're trying to get as much work done as we possibly can during the course of this morning. So will you introduce yourselves, please, to the viewing public and the listening public?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning. My name is Niala Prasad Palaya, and I am the Executive Director of the NIB.
Good morning. Fayad Khan, In-House Actuary and Executive Manager, Policy Planning and Actuarial Services.
Good morning. Navin Rajkumar, Executive Manager, Investments.
Good morning. Sarah Babalal, Executive Manager, Legal Services.
Good morning. Karen Davis Holder, Acting Executive Manager, Finance and Accounting.
Thank you all for attending. We have already introduced ourselves, so you know who we are. So may I invite any member to begin by asking a question of the NIB team? Or would you prefer to make a brief opening statement? I overlooked that. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wish to make this opening statement on behalf of the Chairman of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Michael Toney, who is unavoidably out of the jurisdiction and sends his apology. These are the Chairman's sentiments. Before we begin a detailed discussion, there are some critical points that must be made to put greater context to the issue of the future NIB and the challenges we are facing as a nation. While we acknowledge the committee's legitimate concerns about proper fund management, we at the NIB would at the same time respectfully wish to make the point that proper fund management alone will not save the national insurance system if the fundamentals of the pay-as-you-go system are not properly aligned. That is, the right level of contributions to meet the right level of benefits. Our national insurance system is out of alignment, and we have limited time, Madam Chairman, in which to adjust it before the fund is exhausted. With this misalignment, the system relies on the fund and income derived therefrom to reconcile any shortfall that will arise until the system is back in alignment. The fund is finite and will eventually be exhausted if the system is not put back into alignment. The actuarial reviews, the last being the 9th actuarial review, tells us that we have a limited time to fix the imbalance. Even with the best fund investment strategy and performance, if proper alignment between contributions and benefits is not achieved in the fastest possible time, the balance in the fund will be depleted and the NIS would have failed to do what it is designed to do. At present, income from contributions is less than benefits paid. We are currently drawing down from fund income, and such drawdowns will eventually extend to the fund asset itself. When contributions received are less than benefits paid, the shortfall is of course met by such drawdowns, or in the worst case scenario, by funding from the state as set out in the National Insurance Act. The actuaries analyzed and determined the best level of contributions expected to meet the level of benefits and perhaps some level of savings as well. Once the level of contribution set is met by the national insurance system, it is said to be working well. If for any period, however, Madam Chairman, the contributions received are more than the benefits paid, then of course the surplus is invested by the NIB. This pool of resources is what makes up the fund. Those savings takes us through a period of adjustment when either the level of contributions is too low or benefits paid are too high, or a combination of both. We make these points, Madam Chairman, since we note that most of the questions we were required to answer focused on fund investment strategy and performance. We are ready to explain further to the best of our ability any of the responses made to the questions you have posed to us, as well as any other pertinent matters that you may wish to address. In closing, Madam Chair, while we have some very sound and impactful recommendations to give more life to the fund and to keep the national insurance system sustainable, What we need is the collective buy-in of those who rely on the national insurance system and our tripartite stakeholders in business, labor, and government to ensure urgent reform measures, both short-term and long-term, are implemented with the greatest priority. We are grateful to assist the committee with its inquiry and hope that we can do so in a meaningful manner in the interests of the public and the system. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Dr. Francis?
Thank you, ma'am. It's already been made clear that any changes to the entire framework governing the National Insurance Scheme will have to be championed either at the parliamentary level or at the cabinet level, and the Ministry of Finance will be central to that. But the PS has just stated very clearly that the ministry has difficulty getting information from the NIB. I want to know, on one hand, why is that so? And then on the other hand, what corrective measures will be taken to ensure that it does not continue?
Member, through you, Chair. I beg to differ with the position that has been adopted today by the Ministry of Finance. The NIB is a tripartite organization. There are 9 members of a board, along with an independent chairman. The tripartitism represents 3 members from government, 3 members from business, and 3 members from labor, led by an independent chairman. We consider ourselves to be a compliant organization, Madam Chairman. In fact, we pride ourselves in that for the last 42 years of our existence, we have been able to submit audited financial statements to the Ministry of Finance and to the Parliament. We have met most, if not all, of our statutory obligations, and we have been in active engagement with the Ministry of Finance, especially with respect to the 9th Actuarial Review. And if I may, I would just like to put that in a little bit of a context, in that the oversight with respect from the Ministry of Finance, of course, is through its board that the minister appoints. So the minister appoints the board, and the minister appoints an independent chairman. In accordance with the National Insurance Act, the minister is not allowed to provide specific directions to the National Insurance Board. The minister can only provide general directions as per Section 9 of the National Insurance Act.
Okay, well, I remember we have people looking on and people listening. So I want us to try to speak as plainly as possible.
Sure.
And in the first place, what you are saying is that you do provide your reports and you do allow the Ministry of Finance to have its oversight. I say it in inverted commas. But on the other hand, you are also saying that you are not required to provide that kind of information to the Ministry of Finance because the oversight comes via the board and the independent chairman. How do you explain those two seemingly contradictory things for our viewing and listening public?
Madam Chair, the NIB is a statutory body. So it is guided by the contents of the National Insurance Act. So as the Deputy PS would have said, the reporting requirements as exist for a state enterprise does not exist with the NIB. What we rely on is positive and frequent engagements with the Ministry of Finance and our board, and the Minister of Finance and our chairman. We have been submitting our minutes to the minister. We have met all our statutory requirements in terms of the annual reports and the report on operations. And we have been in active discussions with the Ministry of Finance on most matters, as I said, especially relating to the 9th Actuarial Review. Other than that, Madam Chairman, we don't have the reporting requirements as other entities.
I understand that, but what I'm trying to get at is we have 4 people here from the Ministry of Finance. They were sent by the Minister of Finance to represent his ministry as the officials who would be dealing with the NIB or liaising with the NIB on his behalf. So it seems to me that it's a bit incongruous that there should be a disagreement between the two groups. Is it that NIB does not liaise with this group of people that we have here?
Madam Chairman, at the level of the Executive Director, I would normally liaise with the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Vishnu Danpal, and I have also held discussions with Mr. Suresh Dan. Other than that, I have actually engaged with the Minister of Finance myself. So the flow of communication is normally through the Minister of Finance or the Deputy or the Permanent Secretary to the Chairman or the Executive Director of the NIB.
Morning, Executive Director. There is a development, a housing development called Riverwoods. Could you tell us the relationship between the NIB and Riverwoods, the investment that has been made in Riverwoods and the status of that investment?
Sure, Member. Through you, Chair. Riverwoods forms part of our investment portfolio. The NIB has been attempting to diversify its investment portfolio through land development. The Riverwoods development began probably around 2003, 2004. The intention was, of course, to have a positive return to our investment rate, and of course, to also provide middle-income homes for thousands who need those homes. The development began with approximately 145 single-family units together with townhouses. It was intended to be a gated community. The development itself did suffer some delays through project management challenges, is how I would probably want to sum it up. As of today, we have delivered approximately 100 of those homes. We are probably just left with about 49 homes or thereabouts to be delivered, of which approximately 20 are in its closing stages. We are committed to completing that development, Member, and delivering those homes.
So this development has been 14 years in the making. What has been the investment made, and how has the investment made, how does it compare to the financial expectations that went into the investment decision in the first place?
Member, through the Madam Chair, I don't have the exact figures with respect to Riverwoods because, as you would appreciate, we came prepared to speak on the questions that were submitted to us. What I can say is that the Riverwoods was intended to be an investment opportunity for the NIB, and in the interest of providing accurate information to the committee, I would ask to submit the answers to that question in writing, please.
With a contracting economy, you would find yourself in difficulties, of course, if you only swim in your own pond. How nimble is your investment portfolio in terms of response time? Are we, in terms of months, years, weeks, what? How often do we review and reassess our positions?
Madam Chair, I will ask my Head of Investments, Mr. Rajkumar, to take that question.
Good morning, everyone, again. With regards to the investment policy, we have adopted a self-imposed adoption where we review the strategy every 3 years. So any questions that the committee would have sent, you all referred to an investment policy statement for 2013-2014. That policy statement is now superseded by a new investment policy statement which takes us from the year 2016 to 2019. However, during the course of 2017, given the economic challenges and also given the structural challenges that the NIB currently faces, we underwent a revision, a comprehensive review of the investment policy statement. It's approved at the IEC level and is awaiting board approval.
Now, you all have, NIB has described itself in a certain context as project managers. How many different kinds of projects is NIB currently involved in?
Madam Chair, let me just clarify that question. The NIB is not a project management company. The NIB owns NIPDEC, 100% owned NIPDEC. NIPDEC is involved in project management. That's one of their key activities, but the NIB is not involved in project management.
So what is your relationship, or do you have any controls with respect to NIPDEC?
At this point, Madam Chair, the NIPDEC board is also governed, the NIPDEC is also governed by its own board. Our chairman, Mr. Tony, is actually also the chairman of NIPDEC. And there are members that sit on our board that also sit on the NIPDEC board. In terms of oversight, however, we have been looking carefully at the governance requirements that are required for us to look carefully at our subsidiaries, NIPDEC being just one of them. As you know, we own NIPDEC 100%. We now own HMB by 100%, and we have 51% shareholdings in TTMF. And the board has been actively looking at governance and providing the necessary monitoring for those entities.
Well, what does that mean?
Madam Chair, what it means is that the executive director at this point does not have oversight of NIPDEC. NIPDEC is governed by its own board. Do you understand?
I do understand, but I'm a little surprised because it seems as though people connected, or who ought to be connected in terms of working together to ensure that the NIS succeeds, seem to be operating in silos and seem to be uncertain about reporting requirements, how the acts apply, whether they apply, whether they can interfere or make a comment. If one party does something wrong, there are no sanctions which follow. So it seems to me as though it's all going around in a circle. Now, that is just a view which I share, which I express having heard some of the comments today, because there seems to be no single direction being taken by groups which ought to be focusing on the improvements to the NIS system. Am I wrong in making such a comment?
Madam Chair, how I would like to address that is that this board, led by Mr. Tony, recognized that there are issues that we need to address in our fully owned subsidiaries. And at a very recent board meeting, they would have made a decision that the respective NIPDEC, TTMF, and HMB are now required to submit quarterly documents to the NIB, and that would assist us in our monitoring. But it is at its very preliminary stages, Madam Chairman.
Well, I can't understand that at all. I mean, let us start from the lawyer's point of view. You have your Companies Act, which is now quite old, which governs the duties and responsibilities of directors, whichever kind of company that you are sitting in. And you have NIPDEC, which has been in existence for some time and which has, well, in my view, is a subsidiary of the NIS. And we are now talking about quarterly reports, and we are considering that as a major advancement or improvement. I mean, where are we? Have there been any other attempts to improve the relationship between NIPDEC and NIS prior to these quarterly reports?
Madam Chair, again, to answer the question, allow me to put it into a context, in that having regard to the board oversight, the formal submission of documents would not have been sent up to the NIB. And what I mean by that is that traditionally the chairman and members of the NIB board would also sit on the NIPDEC board, the HMB board, and the TTMF board. So it is the actual composition of the board that would have provided the oversight and the guidance to the subsidiaries. What we have done recently is to formalize that arrangement with the submission of documents now onto the NIB.
Okay. I could editorialize and say that that sounds Kabbalistic, but if we are now at the point where we considering or moving towards them having to send official reports to the NIS, what obtained before was nothing, no system of reporting?
No.
Other than the same chairman being here, there, and everywhere?
Right. What obtained before would have been board oversight and submission of minutes. Minutes do come to the NIB board from the subsidiaries. That is what pertained prior. What pertains now is the submission, is the board oversight, the submission of minutes, and the submission of quarterly reports. And we have actually, as early as yesterday, there was a joint meeting between NIPDEC and NIB, Madam Chairman, where, as I said, the board is now actively looking at taking necessary steps to ensure that there's proper oversight of our subsidiaries, which perhaps may not have happened in the past.
It seems to me that the NIS has incorrectly relied on the fact that some of the members of its board sits on the board of the NIB, because it means that those directors who do not sit on the board of the NIB have been possibly in dereliction of their duty in accordance with the Companies Act, because even though they do not sit on the NIB board, their responsibilities are the same. So what I would like to ask is this: how does NIS, for example, have any say or influence or correct NIB in terms of its procurement policies? I just pull that as an example.
Can you clarify for me, Madam Chairman, then? Is it in terms of the procurement that happens at NIPDEC?
Well, I was just saying that you have said that the oversight primarily is because you have the same directors sitting on two boards.
Correct.
Right? But in the first place, I am saying that that has to be wrong, because the Companies Act gives all directors the same responsibility on the NIS board with respect to oversight of any subsidiary. The second thing I'm asking is, how then is NIS able to influence, direct, correct NIPDEC on any issue? And I just use procurement as one of the issues that you may be considering. I don't know if I'm being clear.
Yeah, you are, yeah. But Madam Chairman, my answer basically remains the same in that there is no direct guidance to NIPDEC at this time. So relative to their procurement activities, they are guided by their own procurement policy, but there's no general or specific directions that are given by NIB to NIPDEC.
Have they provided the NIS board, not simply the members who sit on their board, have they provided the NIS board with their procurement policy? Or do they have a procurement policy, as far as you know?
Yes, I am aware that they have a procurement policy. As to whether that has been formally submitted to the NIB, I can't say, Madam Chairman. I'm not aware.
Madam Executive Director, please correct my impression, because I'm getting the same impression from you that I got from the Deputy Permanent Secretary, that in all of this, we seem overly reliant on the expectation that people will act ethically and correctly, as opposed to having systems, procedures, checks and balances in place. It seems that we are relying on people who will just go there and perform well, as opposed to having the structure and organization that will ensure or mandate that they perform well. And that we are expecting an act to act almost as an omnibus guarantor of correct behavior.
Remember, at this time, NIPDEC is governed by a board of directors. NIPDEC's board of directors manages the affairs of NIPDEC. There are some reporting requirements that we have put in place to ensure that there was better and proper oversight now by NIB, but that did not exist before. So NIPDEC basically manages their own affairs.
Okay, what I would like us to come back to, because I think it might be of interest to those looking on and listening, when you gave your opening statement, you spoke about the fund running out at some point. What date are we looking at?
Right, Madam Chair, I need to put this into a context, as you said, for the listening public. So the NIB conducts actuarial reviews every 3 years. An actuarial review would assess the balance of contributions to benefits. Our last actuarial review was conducted, the 9th actuarial review was conducted on the system as at 2013, and that report was submitted to the NIB in 2015. It was immediately forwarded to the Minister of Finance and laid in Parliament in November of 2015. Subsequent to that, we began our engagements with the Ministry and the Minister of Finance relative to the recommendations that were made in the 9th actuarial review. The 9th actuarial review, of course, spoke to both short-term and long-term recommendations in the context of an aging population. As you know, an aging population is one where once at least 10% of persons are over the age of 60, it is deemed to be an aging population. Trinidad and Tobago, actually, I think the statistics suggest that it's just about 14 to 15% of our population is actually over the age of 60. So putting that into our context, when we look at contribution income that is coming in versus benefit payments that are going out. And I want to share with the committee, Madam Chair, if you would allow me, some statistics which will provide the context as to why I began in the manner in which I began. The NIB right now serves approximately 200,000 persons. In fact, for the year ended, financial year ended 2017, our benefit recipients were 191,840 persons, of which 158,000 are long-term beneficiaries, which means that 82% of the vulnerable persons that we serve in this country are over the age of 60. We would have collected just about $4.6 billion in contribution income, but Madam Chairman, we have paid out $4.7 billion for the year ended June 30th, 2017. And of course, the projections from the 9th actuarial review in the context of the aging population is that the beneficiaries will continue to grow. So that band over 60 will grow because persons are living longer, healthier lives, and the longevity of persons have increased, while the band of persons who are paying contributions into the system right now, which is between 16 and 59, is declining. Persons are having less children, there's the migration, etc. So the projections are that band will get smaller, which means less contributions coming into the system, and the beneficiaries band will get larger. What that means, Madam Chairman, is that our liabilities are projected to grow way into the future. In fact, I want to go back to the actuarial review. So having regard to the aging population and the data that I've just shared with you, the actuarial review suggested to maintain, and as members said, the health of the system, we have short-term and long-term recommendations. The short-term recommendations, Madam Chair, are increasing the contribution rate and increasing the maximum insurable earnings, both of which we did in September of 2016. We moved the contribution rate from 12% to 13.2%, and we increased the maximum insurable earnings from 12,000 to 13,600.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt you, but I also have to keep my eye on the clock.
Sure.
So what I want to ask you, with respect to the increased contributions required, where is our fund?
Right.
When will it run out?
Right.
So for want of a better term.
Right. Chairman, Madam Chairman, the 9th actuarial review has projected that if there is no reform, we must begin liquidating our assets in 2018, 2019. Now, that was said in the 9th Actuarial Review. We have since, Madam Chairman, implemented 2 measures, which are the ones that I just spoke about, increasing the contribution rate and increasing the MIE. That has given us an additional 2 to 3 years on the life of the fund. What we need to focus on, Madam Chairman, is further contribution rate increases from 13.2 to 14.4, and then to 15.6. And secondly, to increase the retirement age. That is a clear recommendation in the actuarial review that will lead to the sustainability of the fund, along with, of course, freezing the minimum pension. So the fund is due, I want to repeat, if no reform is made, the fund we will begin depleting our assets by liquidating our assets by 2020. We have already implemented the short-term measures. We now need the support of this committee, the Minister of Finance, the Ministry of Finance, and all our stakeholders in commencing that, in continuing the discussions that we have commenced with respect to retirement age and moving it slowly from 60 to 65 over a period commencing 2025.
Thank you very much. What I would like to do now is to move on to the representative. Sorry? Yes. From Baker Woodrow under Souza, Mr. Tim Kimpton. I'm wondering, because we are live and because I don't want to have to peek around anybody's shoulders, if someone would volunteer to just move to the second row so that Mr. Kimpton can sit forward. I know I could count on Mr. Dan for his chivalry. Good morning, Mr. Kimpton. Thank you for accepting the invitation of this committee. And I will begin by asking you to give us a brief overview of what your firm does, and also, if you wish, to make a brief opening statement with respect to the matter at hand.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. You'll guess from my accent that I wasn't born and bred in Trinidad. I first came here in 1985, supposedly for 3 years, and I'm still here today. I've spent my entire working life in the area of providing retirement benefits, in the sense of advising employers or pension plan trustees how to provide retirement benefits, and on occasion advising national insurance systems, although we do not, just make it clear, my firm doesn't currently advise the Trinidad national insurance system. The views I'm going to express now are the views of my firm, Baker Woodrow and Souza Limited. We're not representing any other body, just here as an interested and, I hope, knowledgeable party. The terms of reference I was given for this morning were threefold. The first was to give a brief overview of NIS, which I'll do in a moment. The second was to provide any clarification you might want on my written submission. And the third on my perspective on the feasibility of the recommendations in the 9th Actuarial Review, which I take to mean my perspective on the feasibility of implementing the recommendations in the 9th Review. So if I may, I'll tackle the first and third of those items in this opening statement. And I'm aware of the word brief, which, Madam Chairman, you used as well as in the written instructions I got. I will do my best to be brief. But this is a very large and a very important subject, so I'll do my best, but I would crave your indulgence. I'm going to try and concentrate on the important stuff and leave out some of the peripheral stuff. So if we just start with an overview of national insurance, there are actually 3 branches of national insurance that provide different types of benefits. There's the long-term branch, which provides pensions on retirement and also invalidity and survivor pensions. There's the short-term branch, which deals with sickness and maternity and funeral benefits, and the employment injury branch, which the name speaks for itself. We can concentrate almost entirely on the long-term branch. At the moment, that accounts for 90% of the benefit expenditure by the national insurance system. The 9th review, if you look carefully at the projections, says that in 50 years' time, the long-term branch will account for 97% of the benefit expenditure by national insurance. So any changes you make to the other 2 branches have very little overall financial impact. The changes you make to the long-term branch potentially have a large impact. The system at the moment covers employed persons. Benefits are, to an extent, are earnings related, but people aren't covered to the full extent of their earnings. There's a maximum insurable earnings, or if you like, an earnings ceiling, and only earnings up to that level are subject to contributions, and only earnings up to that level go into the calculation of benefits. At the time of the last review, the earnings ceiling was $12,000 a month. Contributions have always been shared between employer and employee in the ratio 2 to 1. So employers pay twice as much as employees pay. It's always struck me that there's, if you like, a political with a small risk there, a small p there, political risk with a small p. That as time goes by and contributions do have to go up, that 2 to 1 ratio will be sacrificed, and it will be expedient to load the increased contributions onto employers rather than to employees. That hasn't happened so far, but it's always struck me as a possibility. And at the time of the actuarial review, employer and employee were jointly paying 12% of insured earnings to national insurance. So with the employers paying 8% and the employees paying 4%. So one of the things I was asked to do today was to comment on the feasibility of implementing the recommendations in the 9th review. So it's worthwhile just very quickly running through the main ones. The first one, which has already been mentioned by the Executive Director of NIB, is that the maximum insurable earnings went up from $12,000 to $13,600 a month from September 2016. So anyone who's an employer like me saw quite a much larger check to sign in September than in August 2016. The review also recommended that there should be annual adjustment to those maximum insurable earnings, that they should go up in line with average earnings in the economy, and also that there should be annual adjustment to the benefits with those, for example, pensions in payment going up by the lesser of increases in earnings and increases in prices. So the recommendations included automatic annual indexation of both covered earnings and hence contributions and benefits. Now that hasn't been done. And then there were 2 recommendations which the actuary writing the review said were fundamental. I beg to differ. I don't think they were fundamental at all. I think they were minor tinkering, to be honest. And those were to reduce the real value of the minimum pension. There's a $3,000 a month minimum pension. To reduce that real value by indexing it at a lower rate than the indexation of earnings limits, contributions, and benefits. And the chosen option in the report, as I understood it, was to index at 50% of the full rate, rather than to freeze the minimum pension entirely. So that would allow the real value of the minimum pension to be gradually eroded by inflation. And the review rightly identifies that there is a problem with the minimum pension, which I'll come on to in a second. And the second of these two recommendations was to gradually increase retirement age to 65, which of course is where national insurance started in the 1970s. Originally we had a retirement age of 65, and that got reduced to late 70s or early 80s to 60. Of course, those two things haven't been done. And then there was a recommendation about contributions, and the first step of that has been implemented. Contributions went up to 13.2% last year. But the review went further than that. It pointed to the need for progressive increases in contributions, ultimately taking the contribution rate to 22.8% of pay. Now, some way down the road, but you still need to think about whether that can be afforded. So in rounded terms, the actuarial review envisaged the rate of contributions being paid to national insurance almost doubling from 12% at the time of the review to 22.8% some years down the road. And there were some other, I would think, second-order recommendations, which I don't think makes much sense for me to comment on today, as time is limited, but I did comment on them in my written submission. So, why is it we need higher contributions to national insurance as things currently stand? Well, if you delve deeply into the review, you find out why. At the moment, we're paying 13.2% of pay jointly, employer and employee. That sounds like a lot, but it's not enough. And I would stress that the inadequacy of the current contribution rate isn't something that's happened by accident. It isn't something that's been the result of maladministration. And it isn't something that's the result of poor investment performance. It's deliberate, and it was done by design. From day one of national insurance, it was deliberately designed to start with a low contribution rate, which would escalate over time. And you look around the Caribbean, and you look at all of the islands who've got national insurance systems that were implemented with the help of the International Labour Office. Now, they all have slight variations one to the next, but they all have this feature. You pay less now and hope someone can pay more in the future. You asked about when NIS will run out of money. Now, I'm conscious this is a public forum, and I think we have to be careful of the language that is used. Someone earlier said NIS was in trouble. I think if you say NIS in trouble, we're going to see in The Guardian or The Express tomorrow morning that NIS is about to go bust. That is not the case. NIS faces some problems, and now is the time to develop serious solutions to them. The review estimates that if you do nothing, NIS would run out of money in 2029. There's one part of the review report, by the way, is sensitivity analysis. Everything that's in the review is based on estimates and projections of what's going to happen in the future. They rest on a whole set of quite complex financial and demographic assumptions. So the results are actually a function of those assumptions. If you make different assumptions about how long people are going to live, for example, you get different answers. And there's a section in the report that shows you how contributions you need, or when NIS might run out of money if nothing is done, how those things vary with apparently very small changes in assumptions can produce quite big changes in outcomes. So when I say to you that the report's saying, well, eventually you need to pay 22.8%, that's probably somewhere, actually, the range, about somewhere between 18 and about 26%, somewhere in that range. And there's one other element of this review that shows you why contributions, or that contributions, need to go up if no other changes are made. If we were to say, for whatever reason, and I'm not suggesting we should, that benefits under NIS will stop accruing today, but we'll carry on paying pensions to existing pensioners, and when existing workers retire, we'll give them a pension, but based only on what's accrued, on what's already been promised to them based on contributions that they're paid to date. NIS would have something of the order of $25 billion to meet those benefit payments over the next however many years. But the review tells you, actually, to pay all those benefits that have been promised to date, you need $75 billion. So just to provide what has already been promised under national insurance, you need to find another $50 billion from somewhere. And that $50 billion has got to come from future contributions, at the same time as people are contributing to meet their own benefit costs. So I'm going to be 60 next year. I'm not planning to retire immediately, but within the next few years, I'll be a national insurance pensioner. And we're currently in a situation where the payment of my pension, and for everyone else in this room who's a similar generation to me, the payment of our pensions depends heavily on the willingness and the ability of our children and our grandchildren to pay contributions to cover the cost of our benefits, as well as paying for their own benefits. And that's one of the reasons why NIS contributions have to go up. My generation hasn't paid enough to cover its own benefits, so we're relying on the next generation to do so. And my thesis is that in the long term, this isn't sustainable. Because what will happen eventually is that the next generation, or the generation after that, of contributors to national insurance will just walk away, and they'll say, no, we will not do this. And socially and politically, it will be impossible to impose higher and higher contribution costs on employers and their employees. So I was asked for my perspective on the feasibility of implementing the recommendations in the 9th review. Yes, in the short term, it is feasible. I think there are some administrative challenges which the 9th review has glossed over, but it would be feasible in the short term to do the things in the review. But I feel quite strongly that's actually asking the wrong question. It's not a question of whether it's feasible to implement the recommendations. It's more a question of, is it advisable to do so? Because the review is done very much on the basis of the status quo. And I don't believe that that status quo is sustainable in the long term. And I think what is missing is that there isn't a proper, clearly articulated and communicated long-term strategy for what national insurance is meant to do. You know, what is national insurance for? And I'd like to just stress here, I don't lay the blame for this at the door of NIB's management or the board. I mean, their website and its mission statement makes it very clear that the job of National Insurance Board is to deliver national insurance benefits as specified in the Act. So their role is the execution of strategy. I would suggest that the formulation of strategy is a political issue and a macroeconomic one. For example, raising retirement age to 65 has enormous implications for the economy as a whole. It's not just a national insurance issue. So I think at the political level, a long-term strategy has to be formulated, and it needs to look at a number of things which are interrelated. One is the level of benefits that NIS is going to provide. The second one is what level of contributions as a country can we afford in the long term. It's no good promising benefits that are going to cost an amount that the next generation won't pay. So, and those two things are intimately related. If we have a lower level of contributions, we're going to have a lower level of benefits down the road. But so I think there needs to be a serious conversation about what can we as a country afford.
Mr. Kimpton. I don't want to break your flow, but I want to ask you this. If it is that, well, philosophically, we have to start from a different point, what's our first question?
What can we afford long-term, Madam Chairman, I think? The comments I've made today, I've been making in one form or another for the last 30 years, and that hasn't changed. This, some of the earlier actuarial reviews were a lot more opaque than the 9th, and for that matter, the 8th and the 7th. I mean, as a technical piece of work looked at by an actuary, I think that review, the current review, is actually quite helpful because it goes into quite a lot of detail, and it takes a proper long-term view. And it tells us that we've got some long-term problems, which earlier reviews didn't make so clear. But it's an issue of cost. Can we afford as a country to pay something approaching 25% of the pay of a lot of people into national insurance? Or is that just too expensive? Does that make our industry uncompetitive? Does it leave people with insufficient money to meet their grocery bills?
If the answer to that is that it's too expensive, is there an alternative apart from simply dismantling the system?
Yes, Madam Chairman, you need to look at what benefits you're providing, and you need to cut your cloth to cut your suit to fit your cloth. I've got that wrong, but you need to trim national insurance benefits, if necessary, to fit within a budget that can be sustained. And there are some broader issues as well you've got to look at. You've also got to look at, is national insurance, what's national insurance going to do? Is it going to provide a floor level of benefit to people who've got nothing else? Or is it going to be the predominant provider of pensions in Trinidad and Tobago, and so squeeze out private saving and occupational pension plans? For example, as recently as 2012, in the then Minister of Finance's budget presentation for 2012-2013, the declared aim was that the national insurance, the maximum insured earnings under national insurance over a very short period would increase to $22,000 per month, which is 60% higher than the current figure. Now, the strategy behind that was never made clear, but it appeared to me that the intent there was that national insurance would provide pensions for everyone and would probably end up squeezing out private saving and squeeze out occupational pension plans, and would broadly end up in the nationalisation of pension provision. Now, that seems to have slipped away. There's been no further mention of that I'm aware of. But I don't think there is a clear strategy. I mean, you could pretend to keep the current structure of NIS, but never increase the earnings ceilings and increase the benefits, and then inflation would take care of the problems for you, which is what happened between about 1980 and the mid-90s in Trinidad. I mean, we got to the stage where national insurance was verging on irrelevance. And then...
Mr. Kimpton, unfortunately, because of time constraints, I have to inquire whether members have any questions for you.
I just want to make a comment, Mr. Kimpton. And you've dealt with it. I was drawn to that statement you made in your submission about NIS operating in a strategic vacuum. And throughout your submission, you've talked about lowering the costs of NIS. And I guess you're directing our attention to looking at the benefits and trimming the benefits in line with what we could afford going into the future. Is that, when you talk about lowering the costs, is it just on the benefit side?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chairman. My apologies for going on and monopolising the last half an hour. I have a tendency to do so when I feel strongly about something. I'm not necessarily saying you've got to reduce the cost. So here to say we must reduce national insurance. What I'm here to say is that we as a country have got to think about whether the costs that are revealed by the 9th Actuarial Review of National Insurance, which I think is a pretty solid piece of work, are costs that we are willing and able to meet in the longer term and willing and able to impose on our children in the reasonable expectation that they will meet them. And if the conclusion is that, yes, we can afford to pay 20 to 25% of pay into national insurance, fine, if that's what people want. And then adjustments will need to be made elsewhere. But if the conclusion is, well, actually, long term, we're paying 13.2% now, and we don't want to be paying much more than 15% down the road, you would have to adjust national insurance by trimming benefits to bring the cost into line with budget. So I'm not necessarily advocating a particular slash and burn approach to national insurance. I'm not advocating that at all. I'm saying let's take this opportunity of a technically very strong piece of work from the actuaries who did the 9th review to have a sensible conversation and work out where national insurance is going to go in the long term. Now, national insurance is a very long-term undertaking. I mean, it's been around since the early 70s, and it's still not fully mature. It needs a long-term framework within which these ladies and gentlemen can manage it.
Do you have an opinion on the administrative costs of NIS?
Not something I've looked at closely, to be honest. I know there's material in the review on that. I didn't look at that closely.
Madam Chair, might we provide some information on the administrative costs? In fact, the limit set by the Board of Directors is 7.5% of contribution income, and we have been operating way below that. For the last financial year, we came in at 4.8%, way below the limit established for administrative costs.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, Mr. Kimpton, what would be your view on a more robust approach to the investment aspect in terms of timeliness
yeah, as an actuary, I tend to come more from the liability side of the balance sheet than the asset side of it. So again, I didn't look too closely at the stuff in the review on investment. The one comment I did make in my written submission is that I feel investment is maybe looked at from slightly too narrow a perspective, in that national insurance is by far the biggest player in the local investment market. And the problem every institutional investor faces in this country is just finding decent investments. And there is a big danger that national insurance gets so big it squeezes everyone else out, which means puts considerable financial stress on pension plans and on insurance companies. And so that is allied to what level of contributions we pay to national insurance, because the more contributions we pay, the more money they've got to invest, and the more pressure that brings to bear on a relatively undersupplied investment market.
Yeah. Well, in terms of, I'm hearing you speak to a small pond, as I've referenced earlier. Are we suggesting really that there's an urgent need to look beyond our shores for investment opportunities?
Yes, I believe there is. It's a great shame that NIS's governing legislation didn't allow that to happen many years ago, when foreign exchange was much more plentiful. I mean, if we were suddenly to say NIS can invest another 10% of its assets overseas, where's it going to find $2.5 billion of foreign exchange? It's not going to be able to. I mean, I sympathise with national insurance, and the problem of investment is a very tricky one. A lot of my pension plan clients have exactly the same problem. Can't find anywhere to invest money.
You have a question? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kimpton. I just wanted to come back to NIB to inquire whether you had any views about Mr. Kimpton's contributions and suggestions.
Madam Chair, if I may, I mean, Mr. Kimpton has some views that we certainly share at the NIBTT, especially with respect to a sustainable long-term contribution rate and the way the system is going to evolve in the future. In fact, what was not brought out for the day as yet was the approach that the NIB is taking to ensure that we remain relevant and sustainable going forward. Right? So we've heard what the recommendations were from the 9th actuarial review. However, the NIB has not accepted all. We do not believe that moving the contribution rate to 22.8% is something that a future generation would be willing to pay. So in summary, what we have recommended to the Ministry of Finance to support us with policy making is 1, we intend to raise the contribution rate to 15.6%. 2, we support the increase in retirement age over a period of time. And 3, we believe that we need to freeze the minimum pension at $3,000. That is phase 1 of our approach, and that would address some of the short-term liquidity needs. Phase 2 of our approach is a wider reform discussion, which we need to have with a number of stakeholders, including the Ministry of Finance, that speaks to what is the long-term vision of the NIB, what level of benefits would be deemed sustainable, because we certainly do not hold a view that 22.8% is something that we want to move towards. So we agree in principle with most of Mr. Kimpton's comments.
Thank you. Member Ramarat has a question for Mr.
I'm
Kimpton.
just going back on the investment side. Your financials for end of June 2016 still shows the Clico Investment Bank, well, you call it an asset, 728 million, still shows that as an asset, and it is supported by a note which sets out the efforts to recover that. But is it, in the time that has passed since you published those financials, does it remain realistic that that asset, as impaired as it is, could be recovered?
Madam Chair, let me have my head of finance address the matter of that investment.
Certainly.
Madam Chair, we totally provided for this investment, and talks are still going on between ourselves and the liquidator concerning this investment.
Does that answer your question? Any other questions?
Well, just for clarity, in case there's any ambiguity, we made a full provision for it, but we are in discussions with the liquidator in an attempt to see if there's anything that we can recover.
But the reason I ask, that represents a significant hit, 728 million, to a fund that we've spent the entire session talking about the health of it, looking into the future. What has NIB done anything in relation to the decision to invest in that entity during that period, September 2008 to January 2009? Has NIB examined that investment decision, and has anybody been asked to be accountable in any way to that for that decision? Because it may not have been information available to members of the public, but surely an institution as significant as NIB ought to have been more prudent in making that investment at that time.
Remember, what I can say is that our investment decisions are guided, as you know, by the Investment Act. There are several levels of approvals that are required at the level of management, then at the investment committee and at the level of the board. I can't speak specifically to whether there were any sanctions taken, but I know that our investment policy is now a very robust policy, and we have included many checks and balances to ensure that our decisions are in keeping with what we can invest in.
So are you saying that in September 2008 to January 2009, your investment policy wasn't robust?
I'm saying that, member, I'm saying that there would have been loopholes, of course, that would have been captured and amended in our new investment policy statement. And I can't speak directly to that investment, member, because the persons who actually would have been involved in that are no longer at the NIB.
Would you be able to provide us, through you, Chair, with a report on that particular investment in terms of what has happened in the context of the decision to make that investment and how it has been handled since then?
Thank you all for your very valuable contributions to an area which is technical and is not easy to understand for those of us with no financial knowledge at all. Normally, what we do at this stage is to invite closing remarks, but I don't think that that would be required. What I would respectfully ask of you is, having heard what each group has had to say, whether you would be minded to give us your comments in writing with respect to the statements or the policies advanced by the other groups attending today. Would that be agreeable to you? Yes? Mrs. Prasad-Pillai, you don't look too comfortable with that suggestion.
Madam Chair, I would have appreciated a moment to just make one final closing statement. It will take me probably about 30 seconds, if you would allow me.
Sure.
What we want to share with the national public and with the committee is that fund depletion is a reality. Reform is needed to ensure that there are benefits to pay for generations to come. The combined measures of freezing the minimum pension, increasing the contribution rate to 15.6%, and gradually increasing the retirement age is expected to delay the liquidation of the fund to 2029. Of course, any changes to the retirement age is one that requires policy changes at the very national level. We have begun those consultations with engaging with our stakeholders representing business and labor. We have begun the discussions with our Minister of Finance since 2015. We have provided him with the necessary information. This is important to all of us, and we want the conversation to begin relative to the retirement age. I thank you.
Thank you. Well, since I gave 30 seconds to Mrs. Prasad-Pillai, does anyone need 30 seconds? 30 seconds up for grabs. Okay. Yes?
Yes, Madam Chair. So far as the implementation of the recommendations of the 9th Actuarial Review, the Ministry shares the NIB's concerns and continues to support their implementation, as well as looking at ways in ensuring that the national insurance, the sustainability of the national insurance for the benefit of our country. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Kimpton, it seems as though, like the cheese, you stand alone.
I've said more than enough, Madam Chairman. I do appreciate being asked to participate in this forum, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, the thing is, this is an ongoing inquiry. It is likely to last longer than the inquiries we've engaged in previously, because it's a pretty large area and it's not easily digestible. So we may call upon you in the future to return or to give us input in writing and so on, and we hope that we can look forward to your cooperation. We want to thank the media, persons in the public gallery for attending, and particularly we want to thank the viewing and listening audience. I've been asked to make this announcement. The public is advised that the committee's third inquiry into commercial banking fees in Trinidad and Tobago will be presented in the House of Representatives, which is due to convene later today. The report will then be available for review on Parliament's website, www.ttparliament.org, and all are encouraged to visit the website and review the report and offer any comments that you may have. Since there is no other business, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.